So, the entire Warhammer 40K community is up in arms over the massive retcon of the Terminus Decree in the Grey Knight's Codex. And well, as usual, the Warhammer community is clutching their pearls over a massive nothing burger. I hate to break it to you, but there's no retcon. Just the entire community parroting one another, chasing speculation over the cliff, like one lemming after the other. And I say this because Games Workshop never explicitly stated what the Terminus Decree was, ever, until Codex Grey Knights for 10th edition in 2025. That is to say, until just a couple of weeks ago. Many viewers asked me to give my thoughts on the new lore, and I certainly will, as it's pretty insane. But more importantly, we need to dive down the rabbit hole deep into a realm most Warhammer fans don't want to go. No, not the deep warp, the realm of reason and critical thinking. So let's start with what the old lore said about the Terminus Decree and where it comes from. Then look at the current lore, which everyone on YouTube's crying about being a retcon that ruins everything, and then we'll go from there. The Terminus Decree. Deep within the chambers of purity, locked away in the chamber said to hold the tomb of the sigillite himself, rests a simple wooden box, embellished with a golden seal. Within this box, written upon ancient parchment, is the instruction known only as the Terminus Decree. This artifact goes unrecorded in all the libraries of the Imperium, for it has been kept secret from all but the Supreme Grand Masters of the chapter. Only a Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights knows how to open the box, and he will do so only when all hope for the future of humanity seems lost. The Terminus Decree is the ultimate sanction of the Grey Knights, a secret so vast it could bring the Imperium to its knees, or save it in its darkest hour. The exact nature of the document is unknown, and the only clue to its contents lies in the box's golden seal. It is whispered that it is the exact match of another seal, found only in one place in all the Imperium's many scattered worlds, the Emperor's Golden Throne. So, that was from the 5th edition Codex Grey Knights, and is the first place it gets brought up. It came out in 2011, so honestly relatively new for Warhammer 40k lore. But we see it as the same in many ways as it is now, just without the details of what is written on the parchment. The ultimate sanction of the Grey Knights, a secret so vast it could bring the Imperium to its knees, or save it in its darkest hour. Okay, so only one person at a time in the entirety of the galaxy knows what the parchment says, as only a Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights is even aware it exists. It rests in its box, within the Sanctum of Purity, known only to whoever the current Supreme Grand Master is. So we've never known what it says on the parchment. Until now. So before we dive in any further, I must say that since confirmation has never before been given on what it does in fact say, nothing that they are stating it says now can be considered a retcon. Though you may consider it lore you don't personally like, there's no logical argument that this is in any way a retcon. So what does the new codex say? Well, here are the words that are wrecking everybody's shit so bad. The Terminus Decree. Held in a simple wooden box that only the Supreme Grand Master may open, the Terminus Decree details the Emperor's final command to the Grey Knights chapter. The Master of Mankind can never be allowed to leave the Golden Throne, either return to life, reborn in another's body, or ascended as some kind of warp entity. And if he does, the Grey Knights must return him to his terrible duty. Indeed, they were created with the possibility of this event in mind, a task beyond the abilities of any other force in the Imperium. The decree offers no guidance on how such feats might be achieved, for it is neither a weapon nor a magic formula. Rather, the Grey Knights would themselves be the weapon on such a desperate day, one that would likely have to cut a path through the ranks of the Custodian Guard and many others to see its duty done. Wow. Okay, that's one hot tamale. But why is it that people hate it so bad? Because it goes against their preconceived notions, trashes their assumptions, and ruins the serotonin hit they're used to getting from confirmation bias. In the 8th edition Codex, they did something much worse with the lore around the Terminus Decree, yet nobody talks about that now, and it seems mostly forgotten. Kinda like Kaldor Drago, who that particular lore actually centers around. But that's the topic for another video. In this video, there are 3 main players we need to talk about that are not themselves Grey Knights. That's Malcador the Hero, Constantine Valdor, Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, and the insane biomancer Basilio Foe. And the assumptions that people have about the events of several of the novels across the Siege of Terra books, particularly the novel Warhawk, are what is confusing the community and causing what is, in my mind, a very unwarranted, ill-focused outrage. But hey, nothing sells as good as outrage these days, except maybe confirmation bias. Too bad you'll find neither one of those here. So when the Siege of Terra was coming to an end, when the enemy was at the very gates, Valdor hunts for Basilio Foe, and this is a pivotal moment for Valdor, as he's running on autopilot for the first time. He's unaware of what the Emperor's will is, and yet he must act. This is something completely new to him. And Valdor is worried that he'll make the wrong choice. Still, if what he assumes is the Emperor's will is actually the Emperor's will, if he's right about that, then he needs Basilio Foe. Because what he's working on is a bioweapon, a super virus that will wipe out Primarchs and Space Marines alike, ending the Astartes Project and the Primarch Project all in one go, and denying Chaos access to such powerful forces as Space Marines and such insane leaders as Primarchs. It's the super weapon of super weapons, and this virus weapon is what everyone in the community is screaming about, how it used to be the Terminus Decree, and how Games Workshop changed everything. And to that I must add that a decree is a decree, a weapon is a weapon. They are entirely different things by definition. But this is the crux of the biscuit, the blade upon which all this balances. Yes, the Terminus Decree of the Grey Knights and the Terminus Sanction that Valdor ordered when he presumed to know the will of the Emperor and acted of his own volition, setting himself on a very dark path, and possibly the path to becoming the King in Yellow, those are mutually exclusive things. Valdor ordered Basilio Foe to create the bioweapon that will end the entirety of the Astartes and probably the Primarchs as well. So much do the Custodes loathe the very concept of the Primarchs. Warmongering terrorists is basically how Valdor looks at the best of them. He, as all the Custodes do, believes the Imperium of Man deserves better than to be ground beneath the heels of demigods arguing over who is who and what is what. Their very whims and desires, fantasies and satisfactions requires that worlds burn by the hundreds. Wherever they go, death follows. Genocide follows. Extinction follows. And Valdor knows this is not what the Emperor actually intended, so he decides it would be okay to develop a contingency to deal with all the Space Marine legions in one go, good and bad, loyalist and traitor, along with their gene fathers. It was Valdor's sanction, his declaration of what he intended to do in the event that humanity was going to fall, due to the imperfect experiments of the Emperor of Mankind. It may have ended up in the hands of the Grey Knights in the end, but Valdor's Terminus Sanction is not in fact the Terminus Decree given to the Grey Knights, ostensibly straight from the Emperor. Games Workshop has shown us multiple contingency plans for inevitable dark futures when the Imperium, even mankind itself, is threatened and may be destroyed entirely. These are two different endgame protocols, and one is a sanction to explicitly deploy a particular weapon in the form of the Primarch killer virus, and the other is a decree given to an extremely secretive faction wherein they are themselves the weapon. And it seems that nearly the entirety of the Warhammer fandom has gotten confused and mixed up these two distinctly different things. But it is very much true that Games Workshop made us think it was one thing, and hinted and teased and suggested for many years. But this is a case of when the truth becomes clear and it is revealed, as it was, it gets rejected because it doesn't adhere to preconceived notions. People have gotten too attached to their assumptions and don't want to feel like they got played, as Games Workshop did lean into the Terminus sanction hard. But now the rug has been pulled out from under us all, and we can see that it wasn't what we had assumed, which to me is awesome, as it is actually much darker. So let's examine the moment that Constantine Valdor chose to think for himself, that he chose to walk his own path, and assuming he was worthy to interpret the will of the Emperor based on his own assumptions alone, or rather taken in the context of his station as Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, as the Emperor's spear. At the height of the Siege of Terra, Valdor has recaptured Basilio Foe and is forcing him to create the bioweapon, assuming to know the will of the Emperor. The Fifth is back. Valdor digested that information. Diocletian, Tribune of the 10,000, stood before him, his armor covered in the vivid scorch marks that gave away recent fighting against the demonic. Alive, he asked. Unknown. Then find out. I mean, Captain General, that his state, life, death, is currently unknown to anyone. The Sigillite is doing what he can, but I am told that even his art is so far proving insufficient. On the edge, that is how it was described to me. On the edge. Weren't they all? Then we must hope he recovers, he said. If he is here, if he can stand again before the end, then that is one more blade, and a rare one at that. Diocletian nodded. Since Valdor had returned to the tower, he had never so much as hinted at the question. Where have you been? Ammon knew. The guards Valdor had placed over the biocriminal as he worked, now in the depths of the tower's own hyper-secret laboratoria, must have had some inkling. None of them would say anything. The Legio Custodes were so used to guarding their secrets that concealment was now an essential part of their nature, the default position, whenever matters of state arose within their ranks. That didn't prevent the issue from preying on Valdor's mind. He still heard the whispers of all the creatures he had killed on Terra. The Emperor remained silent, and in that absence, all he had were those voices, teasing, tempting, reproaching, over and over again. He could end this. If Foe was right, if he was even partly right, then the great experiment Valdor had watched unfold over centuries, the catastrophic creation of those quarrelsome warmongers, it could all be eradicated. To destroy them now before they unraveled creation entirely, that might well have been the Emperor's will. It might be what needed to happen. Surely the day would come, sooner or later in any case. Surely there would have been an Ararat for the legions too. So if Horus, greatest of them all, should make landfall here, if he should break down the gates and seek to enter the sanctum itself, would that be the moment? And if so, would there still be an opportunity to look up at the throne, to seek confirmation before all its great work was destroyed? Or would we have to make the decision before that hour came, alone, trusting in a faculty of judgment that had only ever been created to serve, not to lead? And what if that judgment were wrong? What if the Emperor still had intentions yet to be disclosed? What if this had been his plan all along, and only time and patient loyalty would yet reveal its perfection? Would he, Valdor, then be a greater betrayer even than the Lupercal, led into error by those who had proven themselves over and again to be without scruple or wholesome emotion? Would he, as incorruptible as the stars themselves, be the heretic? Or would he merely stumble at the appointed hour, too frozen by doubt to act? Or was this why he had been given the spear in the first place, to lead him to enlightenment? Would it even work? Should it work? He had almost forgotten Diocletian was still standing there. Valdor collected himself and took up his spear once more. As he did so, he felt the static spike of transference, the abrasive reminder of the blood drunk greedily by this thing. "Thank you for the briefing, Tribune," he said, rising from his seat. "Then you will take to the tunnels again." A sliver of reproach there, or was Valdor seeing phantoms everywhere now? "I will," Valdor said, preparing himself. It would only be worse from this point onward. More of them would be getting in, squirming up from the floors, out from the walls, rising in both stature and malevolence. "I feel the need to make them suffer greatly. Perhaps you will join me on the hunt, two blades together." Diocletian bowed. It will be the highest honor. And then they were moving down the stone corridor, heading lower to where the realms of experience mingled and the Neverborn were starting to breed. And all Valdor heard were the voices, over and over. Can it be done? It had been done. So we see that Valdor questions himself. He's unsure, yet he knows that to not act could spell the destruction of the Imperium, of humanity. But to act, well, that is firing a shot that cannot be unfired, and may have the same or a similar enough result. Valdor is in a seriously messed up place to be, but we don't know for sure that the bioweapon foe is working on is the same as the Terminus Decree, or an aspect of it that the Grey Knight's Supreme Grand Master keeps in secret in the Sanctum of Purity. Valdor knows that having the power of life and death over the Imperium, over the Astartes, should be in the hands of the Astartes, so it is heavily hinted that he gave it to the Grey Knights, but is it explicitly stated that he did? It would make sense. They have a dog in the fight, being Adeptus Astartes, and the Astartes chapter created from the Emperor's own gene seed. However, we must consider that Valdor took his mission upon himself. The Grey Knights were given theirs by the Emperor, as it was his will. Or so they believe to this day. It makes sense that multiple super soldier factions would have their own super secret, end of the galaxy contingency plans in place, and it is appropriate that both of those missions, sanctions, decrees, intentions, orders, whatever you want to call them, it is appropriate that they both be called Terminus. Valdor, as an agent of the Imperium, acting as the Emperor's spear, as he often referred to himself as, takes it upon himself to come up with a final order to save mankind, and he saw the Space Marines, and particularly the Primarchs, as the greatest threat to humanity. His personal biases are flavoring his orders, so he develops a way to wipe out all Space Marines, and that is what he thinks the will of Big E would be, or at least he hopes so. The Grey Knight's final order is much more sinister in nature, much more secretive overall, and is of higher consequence. The Grey Knights are secrecy beyond anything we can actually imagine. It is only because Valdor is Valdor that he even knows, or is allowed to know, that they even exist. The Grey Knight's mission was given to them by the very folks who understood the threat of the Dark King, the nature of the Star Child, the truth of the Primordial Annihilator, and the nature of chaos more than any others, Malcador the Sigillite, and the Emperor of Mankind. Valdor's mission is to stop Space Marines because that's his number one pick for greatest threat. So he makes his Terminus sanction, sanctioning the use of this incredible bioweapon. But the Knight's mission is as far beyond Valdor's as the Emperor himself is above the Captain General. It is the final order, only to be used at the moment all hope is lost, given to the Templars of Titan, who were literally made to receive and obey this particular final order. Everything else they do is only in service to that order, for to obey it is galaxy changing in every way, should it need to be obeyed. This whole fiasco is a case of assumptions getting so overblown that they became the dominant talking point and took on a life of their own. So now that we do know the truth that the Grey Knight's order is not foe's weapon, or using said weapon, remember, an order is not a weapon, folks. They're two different things. One is an abstraction and one is a physicality. And now we know for sure they aren't the same thing. We have two awesome lore threads to pull on, not just one. We have two factions, seemingly both examples of the utmost loyalty to the throne and the Imperium. And both of those factions have endgame goals, agendas, and responsibilities, which will inevitably pit them against one another. So since we actually didn't lose the old lore, it is just not meant for who we thought it was meant for, and we got more new lore, why is everyone so butthurt? That's a good question, and there's no one simple answer. I have a few theories of my own, but let me just say that many in the community followed the loudest voices over the edge of a cliff like a bunch of lemmings, going so far as to rant and rave about how Warhammer 40K is ruined now, everything's changed, etc. But that's just not the case. The decree, as it stands, is known only to one man, and one man alone. And Constantine Valdor is most certainly not aware of what the Grey Knight's Terminus Decree entails, just as they are most likely unaware of his Terminus Sanction and the Primarch Killer project, even if they did themselves end up with the bioweapon. I love to burst bubbles and correct misconceptions commonly held by the Warhammer community about the lore, and this is no exception. Many folks with a lot of reach and large audiences with the loudest voices will tell everyone what to think and what to believe, even though they'll openly talk about how there is more interaction on outrage videos. I feel like misrepresenting the lore because you made assumptions in the past and told people the Terminus Decree was one thing, and it being another, is not grounds to stick to your guns and trash talk the new lore, and claim it is a retcon while you clutch your pearls like some little bitch. It's a moment to say, hey, I was wrong about that in the past. Not to double down on stupid because outrage porn and confirmation bias are more important to growing a YouTube channel than talking about the actual lore. Maybe I'm missing something, but as far as I know, it never once explicitly, directly said that Basilio Foe's bioweapon was in fact a weapon intended to be used by the Grey Knights, and only part of their final order. The Emperor did not create the Grey Knights to wipe out the Astartes, nor the Primarchs. Sorry if you may have thought that for years on end now, but that's just not the case, and it never was. And honestly, it never really made sense to me when people would say that. He created the Grey Knights to keep him on that throne no matter what, ultimately, in the end. That is their final objective, their, if I may, Terminus Decree. This is one of the worst games of telephone I've seen play out across the Warhammer community. It was always a red herring, in hindsight, and that is okay, 40k needs plenty of those. Who doesn't like a surprise once in a while? And to me, the worst part is that the new lore is in no way, shape, or form taking away from the bioweapon plotline. Foe still created that weapon. The intended usage of it may be a bit different than everyone assumed, but it is in fact still a dangling plot thread. This all ties into the King in Yellow if Constantine Valdor does in fact turn out to be him. See my video on this enigmatic character and why it just may not be Valdor if you want to know more on the subject of the King in Yellow. Now, I really do love the Warhammer community and how passionate we can be, but I held off making a video on the Terminus Decree until I got the Grey Knight's Codex in my hands, as I thought it would be wrong to make a video that was out of context if there was more going on to consider than just the sidebar of text we got. Yes, all this controversy was over a single paragraph in a sidebar in Codex Grey Knights. But the virus is still out there, and the Grey Knights also have a different, extremely difficult job to do should it be required. Great! 2 plot elements instead of just the one. That's awesome in my book. It's one thing if you don't care for the new lore, fine, whatever. Everyone has an opinion. But if it offends you, like if you're literally butthurt about that, then I would suggest taking a step back, maybe a deep breath. Go take a critical thinking course at a community college or something in your spare time, or you could just try not being such a little bitch. Thanks for watching.